short horror stories. We got 3 different videos to watch with 9 different stories. Grab some popcorn, grab a drink, and enjoy. But first, set the mood, let's get comfortable. Spooky. Now it's scary. Not really, but we're going to be watching 3 different videos with 9 different stories. The first one is going to be IMR Scary Tales, 3 True Stalker horror stories. Other channels will be linked in the description, but let's get to the video.
Have you ever felt like you were being watched? Have you ever felt the eyes of a stranger on you as you slept, or ate, or went for a walk? I have. Once. And to be honest, I still do. When I was 15, my family moved into a new house in the countryside. I loved it, at first. The open fields, the fresh air, the serenity. It was so much nicer than the city. The house itself was an old country home built sometime in the 1950s. Some of the locals swore the house was haunted, but it didn't seem that way to me. Sure, the floorboards were creaky and the windows in the attic were broken, but those were minor issues that could be handled in no time. Or so we thought. The morning after we moved in, well, things started to take a turn. Dad, we've got mail?
Mail? That can't be right. We haven't registered this place as our new mailing address yet.
Well, I checked the box yesterday and it was empty, so I'm quite sure that these ones came this morning. Maybe they're addressed to the previous owner.
Huh. That wouldn't make sense either. No one's lived in this place for nearly a decade. Let me see those. What in the world?
What's wrong? There's no stamps, but they're all addressed to us. It says... My dad set the letters ablaze, all of them. Each one was a variation of some kind, but the core message remained the same. Someone, somewhere, wanted us to leave our new home. My parents tried to laugh it off as some sort of prank by the locals to newcomers, but I wasn't as convinced. It wasn't until the following morning that we realized how wrong we were. Dad, there's mail again.
What?
There were more letters, each one similar to the last, bearing curses and pleas for us to leave the house. However, this time, there was something else. Is that our house?
I guess, but we don't know when it was taken. It could have been weeks or years even before we got here.
Oh my god! Healy's & Co. That's the name of the moving company that brought our stuff. This picture was taken 2 days ago.
We knew now that we had a case on our hands. The person sending the mail was probably a stalker. My dad called the cops, but they were convinced that this was all an elaborate joke that some local kid was playing on them. They assured us they'd look into it, and I guess that eased my parents' worries a bit. Little did we know the strangeness was just beginning. Over the next few days, the mail kept coming, but we kept ignoring them. We kept trying to pretend everything was normal, like we weren't being watched from a distance by some psychopath. One morning, we found 3 dead rats on our doorstep. Once, a box of blood-stained nails. It was around the same time that I started hearing noises in the house. There were creaks coming through the walls of my bedroom like someone was moving on the other side. The issue was that there was no room on the other side. I told my dad about them, but...
You're on edge, son, and that's totally fine. Anyone would be with these letters we've been getting. The police are looking into it. It'll be fine. And besides, this is a pretty old house. The wind can get in the roof and the floorboards. Not that weird to hear some creaks from time to time.
You're right. I guess that makes sense.
But I wasn't convinced.
Not truly. I knew there was something up, and when the noises didn't stop, I had to check it out for myself. One evening, when my parents weren't home, I placed my ear on the walls and listened for the creaks again. Something was definitely moving behind the wall. I ran down to my dad's garage and picked up a hammer and a crowbar. I moved my shelf aside and pried one of the wall's wooden bars loose. Dad is going to definitely kill me for this. Wait, what the... I grabbed a flashlight and pointed it at the hole I had just opened in my wall. There was a narrow tunnel within, barely wide enough for me to fit, and steep stairs that led down into the unknown. I knew I shouldn't go in. I knew I should wait for my parents or the cops, but my curiosity got the better of me. It was a tight squeeze, but I stepped into it and followed the trail until I arrived at a tiny basement underneath what must have been the living room. What I saw down there made my heart drop. Oh my God, someone's been living here this whole time. Clever boy.
What the fuck is that? Is that Santa Claus?
I knew someone would find out about me sooner or later. They always do.
What's wrong with his
I just
head, bro? Damn.
didn't think it'd be so soon. Who are you? What do you want? Who am I? I should be asking you the same question. What gave you people the right to move into my house? My home! I won't leave. I'll never leave. It's mine, you hear me? Mine! I've already lost everything. My job, my wife, my life. But I won't lose this house too. Over my dead body. Do you think I enjoy this? You think I enjoy hurting you people? I warned the last couple who came here to leave. When they didn't listen, I had to take matters into my own hands. It seems I'm gonna have to do it again.
Nah, pull out the 9, pop his ass. Fucking tin can? Really?
You think you can run? You think you can hide? I will find you!
Bro's calling like a Black Ops 2 zombie.
The cops arrived a few minutes later and my parents followed not long after. By the time they went down to the secret corridor to the stalker's lair, the man was long gone. They found out that the tunnel led out to an old shed out back, and that was how he managed to get in and out without noticing. The stalker escaped, but they did manage to find something down there. An ID card belonging to one Mr. Hank Wilson. The man I saw was a shadow of his former self, all withered and hollow, but I'd recognize those deep blue eyes anywhere. Apparently, he was a businessman who lost his fortune many years ago in a bad investment. He lost everything. His car, his wife, his kids, and his house was foreclosed by the bank and put on the market. Most people around town assumed he jumped into the river on the other side of town, and that his ghost still stuck around the house. Little did they know that it was the man himself doing the haunting. Needless to say, by the time this info got to us the very next morning, my parents and I were already well on our way to my uncle's place the next state over. It's been a good few years since then, and last I checked, they hadn't caught old Hank. The house, his house, is still on the market.
Alright, now we're on
Hey
story
guys,
2.
my name is Owen. Although I was born and lived my whole life in the United States, my parents are from Senegal.
Okay, let's get a rundown of that last video. Holy fuck. So, dude came out of his hole in the shed and put those mail letters there. That's the only way I can assume that happened. He put those mail letters there. And obviously, the dead rats and the bloody nails, the box. Yeah, no. I wouldn't even trust that house from the beginning, let alone live in it forever how long he did. Shit. Alright, well let's move on to the video, or the story 2.
To tell you the truth, I'm proud of my roots, but you have no idea how that affects my life, especially because of my skin color. But what I'm about to tell you is a separate point. That was the day I met the wrong person in the wrong place. He may be a human, but through my eyes, he's a monster. A monster as despicable and hideous as any horror movie you've ever seen.
The Michael Jackson.
It all started on a normal day. It was a Friday night, and I had just left work to go see my girlfriend in the hospital. The building was not in the best condition, and to make matters worse, my girlfriend was on a floor with very few people. The only person around was an old woman and a strange man, and that's when it all started. That strange man kept looking at me. He was sitting next to a room, but when a nurse came in to change the sheets, I could see that the room was empty. The strangest thing is that this person did not hide the fact that he was looking at me. Many times I get hateful looks because of my skin color, but this was different. The man felt me. He even greeted me. When I left my girlfriend's room, I noticed that the man was still sitting in the same position, but when he saw me leaving, he stood up and started to follow me. I got some distance from him and took out my cell phone to make sure he was following me, and at that moment, I confirmed my suspicion. The terrifying man stood behind me, staring at me. He didn't walk. He didn't say anything. He didn't threaten me. He just looked at me. When he realized I was filming him, he started walking quickly in my direction. I tried to move away as fast as I could, but when I realized, he was running with his tetric and horrifying smile. I rushed to the elevator and pushed it as fast as I could. As the elevator doors tried to close, the man stopped running and just looked in the direction of my girlfriend's room and back at me, waving. How had I not noticed? My girlfriend is still there. Once the elevator arrived, I went back to the 7th floor and ran to her room. The old lady was still there, which calmed me down a bit, especially since there was no sign of the psycho. Maybe she came downstairs to find me on the 1st floor. I went into my girlfriend's room and she was sleeping. I didn't want to disturb her, so I went back out. Once I left the room, I felt a needle in my arm, and suddenly everything started to look strange. I could make out the man next to me, who had a syringe. I fell to the floor dizzy, and the man began to drag me into a room. I noticed that I was not fainting. I just felt very weak, and my body was not responding to me. My vision balanced, and the man greeted me again, but when he opened his mouth to tell me something, I noticed something. He had no tongue.
Don't blame him. You wouldn't be very sane either if you'd had a lobotomy.
That voice. Next to the man, another silhouette became more prominent. It was the old woman. The woman had taken off her chin strap and glasses. She was absolutely scary, even worse than the stalker.
Don't try to talk, kid. It will be impossible. Bobo injected you with Grandma's prescription. What a perfect body you have. This is superiority. I envy your skin, your body, and your genes. How can you mistreat them like that?
Crazy racist.
What are you saying? Me? Racist? You should be grateful. Can't you see how I'm envying you? I'm trapped in this rotting old shell, but you... Soon, I will have all this.
As if these words were in order, the stalker pulled out a small knife and slowly approached my face, brushing the edge of the knife across it. What do you want to do?
Oh, isn't it obvious?
The knife came closer and closer to my face. This man was about to skin me, and there was nothing I could do. I was very weak, but I had to try and defend myself. Before I could get my strength up and try to attack the man, the doors of the room opened and we all turned around. A figure attacked the lady with a crutch. It was my girlfriend.
Leave my boyfriend alone, you crazy witch!
The old lady had fallen, but the man was still in front of her.
Do you think I didn't see you following my boyfriend? Do you think I didn't hear the old woman tell you to take him away? I won't let you do anything to him!
My girlfriend attacked the psycho, but he didn't feel a thing. He just smiled at her. I'll be fine! Run away! Limping, my girlfriend tried to escape as best she could, but the psycho began to follow her. I threw myself at her feet and held them, but with a kick, he kicked me away and walked closer toward her. My girlfriend ran away limping as best she could, but the psycho was getting closer and closer to her. I was crawling behind them down the same hallway where I had gotten on the elevator before, but this time the elevator wasn't there. There was no way my girlfriend could escape. Just as the man was about to catch her, the elevator doors opened, and out came 3 men dressed as security, who quickly grabbed the psycho while my girlfriend breathed a sigh of relief. I thought it was all over, but suddenly the old lady lunged at me with the knife. This time, she didn't want to rip my skin off. She just wanted to kill me. I had a little more energy and I was able to match her strength. That was the only thing that saved my life, since his knife was going straight for my neck. I was still very weak, and the lady's strength was starting to get the better of me, but I held on long enough for another of the security men to pull the knife out of her. A short time later, safe and sound, the security guards told us how the hallway had cameras, and even though they missed me due to inattention, they were able to see my girlfriend open the door to attack the old lady and arrived in time before everything got even more complicated. Over time, I learned that my attackers were dedicated to kidnapping black men and extracting their skin and organs. As they said, they were superior. I still remember this lady and how I could not understand in court how her thinking was racist and psychotic, and that she is only one person among millions who, to a lesser extent, act in a similar way. The only thing that leaves me with some peace of mind is that, at least this time, these people will be locked up for good. This time, justice was done.
On February 19th, 2018, Chris Simpson was returning from visiting his girlfriend in the hospital when he had noticed a man following him. In this real footage, we will see how, even for a brief moment, Chris manages to expose him.
He actually took a video. That was fucking interesting. I want to see the full video on that. Like, damn, I wish he made like a proper video of it. Like the whole encounter and everything. But at the same time, if he did, he probably would have dropped his phone or whatever he was recording on as soon as he got stabbed with that needle. With Grandma's recipe. I like that one. That one was a solid, like, 8 out of 10. Go on to the third story. I see we got a nice family.
Hi, I'm Derek. I was really excited to move to New Jersey. I recently got a new job there, but my wife and son were not so excited. But they had agreed for my sake. We had seen this beautiful house in Westfield. It was nice and cozy, but on the very first night while we were unpacking, we got a call on the landline. We were all surprised that someone had called that number when we had not given it out to anyone yet. I picked up the call. The voice on the other side was deep.
Hello, Derek. Welcome to my home.
Whoa.
The call got cut. My wife asked me who it was. I told her about the call and she was shocked that the caller knew my name and claimed this to be his home. We were worried and couldn't sleep. In the middle of the night, I got up to drink some water and came to the kitchen and was looking for a bottle. I opened the fridge and was shocked to see a piece of cake inside with, "To Derek and his family. Happy staying." Ah! I jumped in fear and hit my back on the counter. I hurt my back. My wife came running down to check and saw me lying on the floor. I was in so much pain. Just then, the phone rang again. This time my wife picked it up and put it on speaker. It was the same voice again.
Hey, sorry if I scared you. It was just cake, Derek. I'm sorry about your back. Hope you're okay.
This was even more terrifying. He was watching us and knew what was happening in our home. My wife immediately called 911 and told them what was happening. They sent a couple of cops to the house. They took the landline number and said that they'll initiate a trace, and just left. We could not sleep and were wondering what would happen the next day. My wife was already thinking of finding another place to move to.
Tomorrow, I'm calling the realtor. We are not staying in a creepy place like this.
Good choice.
Calm down, honey. The cops are on it. The house is not the issue. It's some psycho who's the problem.
My wife was not completely convinced by this, but since she couldn't do anything in the middle of the night, She went back to sleep. Later in the night, my back pain intensified and I had to go to the emergency room. But we didn't want to leave the kids home alone, so I decided to take a cab. The cab arrived surprisingly faster than I expected. I got in. The cab driver saw me in pain and was very helpful. He even offered to drop me off back at home. I went to the emergency room where they gave me a few painkillers and told me to rest for a week. I sat in the cab and dozed off because of the painkillers. And when I woke up, I was at the doorstep of my place. My wife woke me up. I was surprised to have ended up there. She helped me stand and get into the house. She was about to close the door when the phone rang again. My wife did not want to pick up the call. It continued to ring and stopped. Then it started again. This time I picked it up and the voice was very angry.
Derek, I was nice this time and dropped you home. If you try to contact the cops, I won't be so nice.
The call got cut. He was the cab driver. I felt so angry that he was so close and I didn't know. I slept feeling frustrated. For the next couple of days, there was no phone call from the creepy guy. The cops were still looking for the caller and were unable to trace him. I was at home resting because of the back pain. My wife had called the realtor and was trying to find another house, but no good options were coming our way. My wife was getting frustrated. It was the fourth night of our stay. We were having dinner when my son, Sam, suddenly asked,
Dad, my friend Keith told me that this house is haunted. Is that true?
I almost choked on my food when I heard that. This was news to me. My wife was also shocked to hear this. I told my son that there is no such thing as haunted houses and asked him to finish his food and go to bed. After tucking him in his bed, my wife came and was about to ask me something when the phone rang again. Since the cops were tracing the call, they had asked us not to stop talking to the caller, and so we had picked up the call so that the cops could trace him. When I picked it up, the caller was laughing.
Derek, tell your son that his friend was right. The walls of the house hide a lot of secrets.
I begged him to leave us alone, but he told me he couldn't because I was part of the family from the time I started living at the house. My wife was frustrated. She took the phone and yelled at him.
Who the hell are you? And what do you want?
He just laughed and cut the call. Later that night, when I was switching off the lights and going to the bedroom, I suddenly felt a shadow behind me. I turned to look and there was no one there. I thought I was seeing things because of what the caller told me. I was about to enter the room when I heard a knock from Sam's room. I rushed to his room and when I opened it, Sam was sleeping peacefully. I heaved a sigh of relief and went back to the room and slept. The next day, our realtor called and we told her what was happening and threatened to sue her if she didn't find us another house. She apologized and told us about another place closer to the city. We took the help of the cops and moved to the other place, never to come back to this strange house. Sometime later, I heard in the news about the cops catching a guy called Arthur, who was threatening and stalking people who took that house. The guy was deranged and psychotic. When they caught him, he confessed to have killed people and hid their bodies in the walls of the house.
Oh, hell no. Shit. Well, that was it for the first video. Those were some pretty good stories. The first video, I would rate that like a good 5 out of 10. The second one, like I said, that was a good, 8, 9 out of 10? This one, I'll give that one a good 7 out of 10. 3 disturbing true farm horror stories by Mr. Nightmare. I've heard about him. I've heard he's got some good stories. But we'll see it. I always like hearing about farm horror stories. Story 1. By
My
Ian
wife
Carter.
Cheryl and I own a farm in Buckingham, Iowa, where we mainly grow corn. This was in August of 2018 on a slightly rainy night. Cheryl and I have both spent our entire lives in the farm life. It's really all we know. Of course, farm life in Iowa means lots of space and very few people. Our closest neighbors, George and Kenny, were each about half a mile away in opposite directions, also farmers. With not much else going on around here, it's easy to become friends with your neighbors. We often have George and Kenny and their wives over and vice versa. On this one otherwise normal weekend night, we had George and his wife over for drinks. We all got pretty drunk while playing board games. They left around 11. Luckily, it's a 30-second straight line of a drive home. We continued to drink some wine as we watched one of our favorite movies. We were starting to get tired. We were definitely feeling the effects of the wine. We were most likely just going to fall asleep on the couch cuddled up together when there was a knock at the front door. A knock at the door at this hour was unusual. In fact, it never happened before. But accompanied with the knocks, we thought we could hear a voice say something. I lowered the volume of the TV. We waited for it to happen again. Like 20 seconds later, another set of knocks at the door, followed by a muffled voice saying, "We need help." I was about to get up and open the door when Cheryl shook my arm, and I looked at her, and she made a face and shook her head no. I whispered, "I'm just going to ask who it is." She replied I shouldn't let them know we're home, but odds are they already knew we were home. I went over to the door and asked, "Who is it?" The voice on the other side said through the door, "Oh, thank God, can you open up? We're lost." I said, "Who's we?" The voice said back, "My wife and I." I replied, "Can your wife say something?"
That's a skinwalker.
There was a silence for a few seconds. I followed it up with, "Did you hear me?" The same voice said back, "Yeah, but she's not next to me right now." This is where red flags started going off in my head, and I started to realize the voice sounded a little off, like a man trying to make his voice sound a little higher. I laughed and said, "George, is that you?" George is a big goof, and him being drunk, it wouldn't be unheard of for him to do something like this. The voice said back, "Yeah," in a slightly deeper voice now. I almost felt relief, believing that it was actually George, but I didn't want to open the door just yet before confirming. Having someone knock on your door out here late at night claiming to be lost doesn't happen. It's not a thing, and it's an immediate cause for alarm. I said through the door, "Prove it, what's your wife's name?" A now unfamiliar voice said back, "That's a trick question." My smile disappeared. I went to get my phone and called George.
Trick question.
Cheryl was watching the whole thing, telling me we should call the police. I said, "Hold on." The phone rang like 3 times before George picked up. Right away, I said, "Are you at my front door right now?" And he said, "No, why?" I told him there's someone at our front door trying to trick me into opening it. He said he'll hurry right over, and we hung up. Keep in mind all of us were still drunk during this. There were knocks again at the door. I yelled, "I have a shotgun waiting for you if you don't leave here now." The voice said back, "We're just trying to use a phone, that's all we need."
No.
Cheryl called 911, which out here it takes an extremely long time for an officer to arrive on scene. We heard footsteps walking around our wooden deck that wraps around the house. A couple sets of footsteps, actually. They stopped at one of our windows, which had the blinds closed, and we heard one of them attempting to lift the window open. This caused Cheryl, who was still on the phone with 911, to scream, "Leave us alone." I followed suit and screamed at the top of my lungs to get the fuck out of here or I'll shoot you. It took me that long to think to run upstairs to grab my shotgun from the closet. Literally a few seconds later, there were more pounds at the door, and this time it was actually George's voice yelling, "Open up." I let George in, who also brought his shotgun. He said he didn't see anything or anyone as he pulled up. He stayed with us until a police officer came to the house. He did a quick little scan of the property with us, then left. We took heed of his advice in installing a camera in the front and back, surprisingly something we never thought of until this incident. Still gives me chills that all that was keeping out whoever was on our front deck that night was a wooden door.
No. Alright. My best guess. My best guess, that was a skinwalker. Let me know what you think that shit was. I think that was a skinwalker. But we got story 2 by Alex Voss. Let's see his story.
This story takes place at my grandparents' farm in the summer of 2018. I was alone one night since my grandparents were away. I was getting paid to watch the farm for a couple nights. On the last night, I was watching TV in the living room when I started to hear a strange noise coming from outside in the cornfield. At first, I shrugged it off because I figured it was most likely a deer. That was until I heard all the cows start mooing at the same time. Usually you would hear maybe one cow moo at a time, but when every single cow starts mooing, then something is wrong. Something or someone would have to startle them to make all the cows freak out like that. I was the only one at the farm, so it was of course my job to see what was going on. So I went to the closet to get a coat on and go outside, but just as I was about to go outside, I heard a very high-pitched cow scream. I stood still for a while, shaking in my boots. Something terribly wrong was going on with the cows. I quickly ran upstairs to my grandpa's room. Under his bed, he always keeps a few guns. I loaded his hunting rifle and went outside. The cows still would not stop mooing, so I went into the barn to check. There was nothing out of the ordinary. All the cows were still here. That was until I walked further down and noticed that one cow was missing from his stall. It didn't make sense. I was sure he was tied up to the stall the last time I saw him. Then I thought I could hear a cow make a high-pitched moo sound from the cornfield outside the barn. So I went outside, but while I was walking to the field, I swear I heard what sounded like people talking. I finally had enough of this. I fired 2 rounds into the air. Everything went silent. The cows were quiet, and I couldn't hear anything from the field. That was until I heard the footsteps in the field. I didn't know if I had the balls to go inside the cornfield, but I had to do it anyway. This is the exact reason farmers have guns, and I couldn't just hide inside the house with trespassers in the field. I started to walk into the crops, and I could hear many pairs of footsteps all beside me. I was getting even more freaked out as I continued to walk deeper into the field, and then I froze.
Is this actual video?
Down one of the rows of corn, there was a person in all black standing a few feet away from me. I rose my gun up, telling him to get out of my field. I wasn't bluffing, I was ready to shoot, but he never moved. So I fired another round into the air to scare him off, but he still didn't move an inch. Then he actually started walking towards me with his arms slightly out, as if telling me to lower my weapon. I aimed my gun at him again, screaming at him to go away. And that's when I made the horrible realization that I was surrounded by people dressed in dark clothing, like at least 6 or 7 other people. That was only the people I could see, who knows if there were more. And as the one guy got closer, I realized something. He, along with the rest, were all wearing these creepy masks. The man stopped approaching me as I started stepping backwards. They all stood in silence for a moment. I cannot explain the fear that I was experiencing. I thought I was about to be killed. That was when they all started chanting something. I couldn't understand it. It sounded like a different language, but the chants almost sounded like a song, and I started wondering if they were about to perform some kind of sick ritual on me. That was when I took the opportunity to run as fast as I could down a few rows of corn. When I was out of breath, I stopped and fired about 6 rounds in their direction. I heard a bunch of footsteps and rustling crops going in the opposite direction. I finally scared them off. I ran back towards the direction of the farmhouse and stopped. I saw something on the ground, and what I saw has stuck with me, scarred me.
Was it a cow?
There was a cow head sitting in the middle of a circle of candles. I wanted to yak, and as soon as I got back to the farmhouse, I did. I grabbed the house phone and called the police. I told the operator everything to the best of my ability. She said that an officer would be there soon. After I got off the phone with the police, I called my parents explaining the situation and asked them to come pick me up. My dad said he'd be there in an hour. I sat upstairs in my grandpa's room, shaking and crying at the same time, waiting for what felt like an eternity, until I finally heard a police car outside. I ran outside to the officer and never felt happier in my life. I told everything to the officer. He searched the barn and then a little bit of the cornfield, and he found the cow head. He called up a search team after that, as this was now an active crime scene. When my parents arrived, I, along with the first officer, had a talk with them about everything that happened. Thankfully, my parents took me home after that. My grandparents took this very seriously, of course, and installed a high-tech security camera system all over the farm. Who knows what kind of group that was, but clearly they were doing some kind of animal sacrifice ritual or something. I just happened to be the unlucky one home alone on the farm they chose to do it at.
Alright, so that one. That one was genuinely creepy. I probably wouldn't have sat there that long for all of them to surround me. Even though I probably already am surrounded by them. But as soon as they start walking towards me, I'm shooting. No ifs, ands, or buts. No second guessing. My finger is pulling that trigger no matter what. We got story number 3 now by Howard C. Let's hear his story.
My name is Howard. I'm 25 years old, and I live on my family's farm. I help take care of it when my parents are out of town. It's just a little family farm, not a commercial farm or anything like that. My parents want me to take it over when they're too old to take care of it anymore, as I'm the oldest of 3 and the only son. But honestly, I don't really want to. I don't see myself staying in the middle of Arkansas my whole life, and especially not after something really weird that happened only last July. My parents were on a romantic trip for a week, and so it was my 2 sisters Crystal and Morgan and I taking care of the property while they were gone. There's not much around here, lots of privacy and such, a little too much in my opinion. Except for this one night. It started later on in the night as it was approaching time to go to bed. My sisters do college online. Crystal takes summer courses, and so she was in her room on her laptop doing work. Morgan and I were just hanging out watching some dumb show in the living room. All 3 of us kind of want to get out of the farm lifestyle. Me especially, since I'm oldest and in the prime of my 20s. One dreaded part of farm life is the predators, though. Not just the animals that come and eat your produce, but the people that come and steal from you. Believe it or not, it happens. It hasn't happened many times to us, but it does happen. We have a few guns in the house for this exact reason. Our 2 dogs outside suddenly started going crazy in the backyard. Something spooked them for sure. I first thing went outside to the yard to see what they were barking at. They both were looking in the direction of the crops, going crazy. I yelled at them to shut up, and they went quiet. I stepped right in front of the crops and listened. I heard a whistling from inside of the cornfield. It was undoubtedly a human's whistling. This was the first time I was experiencing a trespasser on the property with my dad not here. I had to hurry inside to get one of the guns. The dogs started barking again. I told my sisters that someone's outside in the cornfield and I had to go chase them away. They both said that was a terrible idea to go run into the cornfield in the dark, and they knocked some sense into me when I realized they were right. I also realized how downright terrifying that would be. So instead, I went out back to the dogs once more going crazy, barking in the direction of the crops. I aimed the gun into the air and fired off a shot which echoed into the night, silencing the dogs. I also was on some kind of power trip in the moment and screamed out to get off our land as loud as I could. I felt that would have done the trick and went back inside. My sisters were both laughing, which caused me to laugh too, but our little laugh amongst each other didn't last long, because the dogs started going crazy again, even crazier this time. I went back outside, ready to do the same thing again, but I felt my heart skip a beat when I saw the guy standing about 20 feet from the dogs, right in front of the cornfield. He looked at me and I screamed, "Hey," at which point he ran into the cornfield. I started running over and fired another shot into the air. I stopped by the dogs. There was no chance in hell I was going in there. I wasn't about to leave the dogs out here either. I unclamped their chains from the hooks and brought them inside the house. I told my sister someone was sneaking around in the cornfield. So what did we do? We called our dad. He told me I had to be the man of the house and protect my sisters. He recommended I fire another warning shot outside if whoever it was came back. After this, we all just gradually went to our respective rooms. My sisters each brought one of the dogs in their rooms and I brought the gun in my room, just because we were all a little spooked by this. I had the window open, and as I was laying in bed watching a movie on my laptop, I heard a whistling from outside. I hurried to the window and looked out to see someone slowly walking in the grass. Then, like he had some sixth sense, he stopped walking and turned to look at my window, still whistling. This jerk was obviously trying to mess with us and scare us. A very stupid idea when I already made it clear I had a gun. I I ran to grab the gun off the bed and aimed it out the window. I shot at the grass a few feet away from him, purposely missing, of course. This cut his little horror movie act short, and he ran out of view of my window towards the front of the house.
No.
This time he didn't come back. He'd have to be a fool to come back after that. I obviously told my sisters why I shot, and I assured them he would not be coming back. We never found out who it was or why. It could have been some teen or multiple teens just trying to scare some innocent farmers for fun, or it could have been an actually dangerous person.
Alright, again. Maybe the first warning shot. I'd shoot one warning shot. But as soon as I see them, no. I'm shooting. Right then and there. I'm shooting them. Camping Horror Stories by Midnight Society. I haven't heard about this channel, but we'll see how good they are. Start.
When I was 12 years old, my father and I went on a camping trip in a more remote and wooded part of a forest that was away from the usual campsites. My dad was a self-proclaimed outdoorsman and said camping in the explored grounds took the wild nature aspect out of what made camping fun. This particular trip was anything but fun. When we set up camp deeper into the woods than most campers would have, we made a fire, cooked some marshmallows, and set up our sleeping bags for the night. The fire was put out, and I quickly realized how dark the woods were with nothing but moonlight to be able to see 10 feet in any direction, which was nothing but tall, thick trees and branches. I felt safe enough with my dad a few feet away from me, and felt my fear turn to exhaustion from hiking 4 miles. I fell asleep as everything truly went dark.
I think camping horror stories are my favorite.
I awoke not even 2 hours later to the sound of crunching leaves in darkness. Thinking my dad was up, I looked around and was confused to see nothing. The old campfire wasn't there. My dad's sleeping bag was nowhere near me. Young and afraid, I could still realize the situation. Nothing familiar was near me because I had been dragged away in my sleep. Praying it was a dream, I screamed, filling the quiet woods with an echo that scared me even more. I got up out of my sleeping bag and began to just run. Not knowing where I was going and what direction, I began to hear more leaves crunching from behind me, but faster and louder. I began running faster than I ever had in my life when I saw a light emerge 100 feet away through the forest, and I could hear my dad begin to call out for me. I immediately switched directions and could hear a raspy voice behind me, followed by a dark sigh of breath. I couldn't hear the second set of footsteps behind me anymore. Soon after I reached my father's embrace, I began to cry. With my dad's shotgun drawn, it was a long, sleepless night I'll never forget. I still have no idea who dragged me away and how I didn't wake up sooner. As the bright morning sun rose, we began to pack up camp and followed the drag marks in the ground, finding my sleeping bag up against a tree. With it, a note was stabbed into the bark with a rusty knife. The message was brief.
Don't come back.
We didn't.
I wouldn't either. I don't know how he slept through getting dragged away. And from the sounds of it, he was far away. I don't know how he slept through all of that. But I tell you what, the moment I am touched or moved, I'm up, I'm ready to go. That one was like, that was an 8 out of 10 story right there. We got story number 2. the whistle.
My friend and I decided to take a camping trip in a North Carolina national forest. The first night was a classic camping experience. We found a nice empty campground surrounded by trees, pitched a tent, and cooked by the fire, laughing at old stories from high school. It was a good time that by the next day we decided to fish until dark and stay one more night. The sun began to set and we returned to our campsite. Again, sitting by the fire, we began to cook our fish we caught earlier, when we heard a distant whistle.
Shooting star, make a wish.
It was strange. We weren't close at all to any nearby campsites. We also didn't know what else could possibly make that noise. We chalked it up to maybe some kind of bird and continued to talk. But the conversation easily turned back to the whistle sound, and how it felt so human. Not trying to make our last night ruined by fear, we decided to sleep before we creeped ourselves out too much. We put the fire out and got to the tent. An hour went by, and I could tell neither of us could really fall asleep this time. All of a sudden, we sat up and stared at each other as a loud cry for help rang out into the echo of the night. Now we knew someone had to have been out here with us. With our fears confirmed, we were completely shocked and scared, having no idea what to do next. The scream finally silenced after about 15 seconds. The looks on our face was enough to read each other's mind. Whatever was happening out there, we didn't want any part in it. Neither of us felt like being a hero. I don't think either of us had been more scared in our lives. Regardless, I unzipped the tent and poked my head out. Of course, nothing but darkness and the silhouettes of trees filled my vision. I watched and listened for at least 5 minutes, and when I started to think it was over, I hear leaves crush the ground. Slow and very faint footsteps began coming towards our campsite. My friend practically pulled me back into the tent and closed it. I listened once more for the footsteps, but heard nothing again. However, the eerie silence was short-lived when the tent began to be attacked by a shower of large rocks and branches. Whoever or whatever this was tried to flatten out and break our tent. It was a decent sized tent, but we found ourselves forced into the corner as the tent started caving in on one side. The worst part about being out in the wilderness is that when things like this are happening, there's no police, no phone call to 911, just survival.
This is why you bring a gun.
My friend and I whispered about how to deal with the situation, and after gaining courage from the realization that it was most likely a 2-on-1, we broke out of the tent and began throwing back all rocks and sticks we could find into the dark wooded hills. I picked up the densest stone I could feel for and chucked it into what I thought was a tree by accident. But when I saw it make contact, I could see what I really hit was a humanoid figure of some sort, as it instantly whistled just like before, but louder, and began to move in strides back up the hill away from us. It didn't feel like a victory, more like bought time. Immediately after, I told my friend we needed to pack our few items we had with us and head back down the trail, which luckily was in the opposite direction. The rest of the night was a fear fest. Hours of jogging a barely visible trail finally led us back to my truck, where we immediately drove off in a panic, feeling lucky we weren't followed. I didn't look back, but my friend did, and swears to this day he could see a tall black figure stand by the trees watching us drive away as the night faded from dusk to dawn.
Hell no.
While we may laugh about it now, you couldn't pay us to go back camping in those woods.
Alright, story 2. That one. I don't know how to feel about that one. Especially the I don't know what to think that thing was. I'd probably like to think it was like Probably a skinwalker. Could have been anything, honestly. That's the best thing I could think of, though. Well, alright. So the last story, we got story number 3, hunting ground. See what this is all about.
Growing up, my family loved to go camping, so I always made it a point to go at least once a year. My regular camping gear was starting to diminish, and decided before I headed into the nearby mountainous forest, I would need to stop at the outdoor store for new gear. I got to the store at about 6 p.m., and as the sun set, I knew I needed to be quick to set up camp at a reasonable hour. As I was walking through the aisles, I started noticing a larger man watching me from a distance, and then follow me as I went into the next aisle. I began to get fed up with the strange behavior, and as intimidating as he was, I finally turned to the man and asked if I could help him. Not saying a word, he just turned around and left the store. I didn't know the man, and couldn't think of a good reason he would have to be following me, but as long as he was leaving, that's all I cared about. I paid for my new pop-up tent, firewood, and lantern, then loaded it all into my truck as I finally started driving out to the campgrounds. On the drive there, I realized how fast it began to get dark, but I was already committed to setting up tonight and finishing early in the morning. I parked my truck halfway through the trail and started setting up in a nearby clearing. When it reached 11 p.m. and the campfire began to die out, I got into my new tent and closed my eyes. 10 minutes passed, and as my body began to relax, my muscles immediately tensed back up. The sound of breathing filled the air. Not loud, but not quiet. It wasn't animal either. I could hear from directly to the right of my tent the slow and deep breaths of what had to be human breathing. The certain suspicion of someone remaining idle at my tent scared me to the core. I stupidly left any weapons in my truck and knew I had to make some sort of escape back to the dirt path I parked along. The breathing started getting heavier, and as I felt trapped in the tent, I decided to make a break for it through the woods. I picked up my flashlight and turned it on. Getting out of the tent was loud and obvious. I immediately began to hear footsteps shift among the leaves as my arm was grabbed from behind a nearby tree. I screamed and shined the light into my predator's face to see the same man from inside the camping store. The malicious expression on his face said it all. I quickly jabbed the handle of my flashlight into his face as his grip on my arm became loose. I booked it all the way to the back of the road I parked my truck along, only to find my tires had been slashed. He must have followed me and was trying to eliminate any way I could escape the dark wilderness. He had been hunting me like prey. I could still get inside my truck, but feared I would only trap myself rather than escape my attacker. I instead grabbed my taser from the center console and kept moving. My only option became jogging down the path until I met with the main road. I turned to look behind me, and to my horror, I could see the man again, this time running directly towards me. I flashed my taser and watched him stop dead in his tracks. It was dark, but with the flashlight on the man, I watched him slowly circle around, passing me until he ran forward away from me. When I couldn't see him in the distance anymore, I sprinted back to my truck and called for help. I reported the incident, but I've never heard of anything else happening to this day. I'll never go camping alone again, or without a weapon. Harmless fun in the woods for some could be hunting grounds for twisted individuals.
Alright, that one was good. That one was real good. But the fact that that man followed him all the way there and just sat outside of his tent breathing I don't know. I like that one. That was a 9 out of 10 story right there. A 9 out of 10 story. I hope you guys enjoyed this video of short horror stories. Let me know what you guys want me to watch next, or any video ideas for Omegle. And I'll look into it and I might do them. But other than that, I'll see you guys in the next video.